They called Africa the Dark Continent, but the real darkness was the erasure of its truth. For centuries, the world has been told a false story about black people, one that begins in chains and poverty. But what if the true origin is far more majestic, far more powerful? Today, we unravel the forgotten truth, the real origin of black people, and reveal what they never wanted you to know about Africa. Segment 1. Cradle of civilization. Long before Europe built its cathedrals, and long before the pyramids of Giza sparked global wonder, Africa was already breathing life into humanity. Modern science agrees Africa is the birthplace of mankind. The oldest human fossils ever discovered were found not in the West, but deep in the soil of Ethiopia and Tanzania. These remains, dating back over 200,000 years, are evidence that black people are not just survivors of history there at its beginning. But Africa was not simply home to ancient humans. It was the ground of innovation. Early humans in Africa created tools, tamed fire, painted their stories onto cave walls, and learned to farm and build. They were astronomers, measuring the stars long before telescopes. Africa was not a land of wilderness, it was the world's first university. But that truth was buried. Segment 2. Lost Kingdoms of Africa. Most schools teach about Greece and Rome. But what of Nubia, where kings reigned with gold and scholars debated under starlight? What of Great Zimbabwe, with its towering stone walls and advanced trade networks? What of Carthage, an African metropolis that challenged the Roman Empire? These kingdoms were rich, structured, and powerful, yet erased from most history books. Africa was not one kingdom, it was a continent of kingdoms. From the mighty walls of Benin City to the silent libraries of Timbuktu, black people were kings, queens, traders, builders, and thinkers. They minted coins, built cities, and ruled empires. But in Western history, these stories were replaced with silence or were written in shame. Segment 3. Africa in the Bible. Africa is not absent from the Bible. In fact, it is central. The Garden of Eden itself is described as being near rivers, two of which, the Pishon and Gihon, are believed by many scholars to flow through parts of Africa. Kaj, Mizraim, and Sheba, names of ancient African nations, appear throughout Scripture. Moses married a Cushite woman. The Queen of Sheba brought gifts to Solomon. Jesus even fled to Egypt for protection. Africa was not cursed, it was chosen. But colonial theology twisted these narratives. They claimed blackness was a mark of sin, using the so-called curse of Ham to justify slavery. But this was a lie, a manipulation of Scripture to excuse inhumanity. The truth is this: Africa is sacred soil, and black people have always been part of God's plan. Segment 4. Africa's hidden knowledge. In the heart of Mali, centuries ago, the city of Timbuktu held thousands of manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and law. These were not simple villages. They were intellectual epicenters. Africans charted the stars, performed surgery, and passed wisdom through oral traditions as deep and complex as written language. Why don't we learn about this? Because colonizers believed that to enslave the body, they must first enslave the mind. They portrayed Africans as primitive, incapable of reason or order. They burned libraries, dismantled shrines, and banned languages. But the knowledge survived, hidden in stories, dances, symbols, and names. The spirit of the ancestors was never erased, it was encoded. Segment 5. The Great Rewrite. Colonization and historical erasure. Europe didn't discover Africa, they invaded it. Colonization wasn't exploration, it was exploitation. The rich history of black people was systematically erased. Textbooks glorified conquistadors, while ignoring African empires. Maps were redrawn, names were changed, languages were suppressed, and perhaps most devastating, African children were taught to be ashamed of their skin. their history, and their homeland. Slavery was not the beginning of black history, it was a violent interruption. Colonizers crafted the savage Africa myth to justify what they were doing. But behind that myth stood a continent of genius, strength, and faith. They tried to erase the truth, but it is being restored. Segment 6, reclaiming our origin today. We are in a moment of awakening. DNA tests trace black roots to royal bloodlines. Archaeologists uncover ancient structures more complex than anything previously imagined. African voices are retelling their own stories, and scholars are translating old manuscripts into global knowledge. The world is remembering what it tried to forget. The origin of black people is not painted as power. You are not the descendant of slaves. You are the descendant of survivors, kings, mothers of nations, and builders of worlds. The blood in your veins flows from the birthplace of humanity. And now, it is time for the truth to rise again. If this story touched your soul, don't let it stop here. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to know who they really are. And subscribe for more truth, because history doesn't need to be rewritten. It needs to be remembered. Drop a comment below. What did this truth awaken in you?